Good morning, everyone. Thanks for getting up so early on a Sunday and coming to the virtual incarnation of Balticon. I wish we could be with you in the flesh and I could bring you donuts, which is normally how I begin a Sunday morning panel at Balticon, but not this time. This is the panel on writing while life rolls over you, and it seems like there's a lot of life rolling over all of us at the moment. We're going to talk about how to survive unexpected work, how to get our writing done, how to deal with life. Before I introduce the panelists here, just a little bit of business. If you are doing Zoom here, I don't know if you've done it before, you notice down at the bottom we've got a chat box and a Q&A box. We're going to really get to questions about halfway through, but I'm going to be keeping an eye on it, and if there's something that seems relevant to a topic we're on, I'll try to weave it in. But for the most part, I'll leave that till about halfway through, and you can be chatting amongst yourself in the chat room, and we'll peek in there for a while, but mostly I'm going to be paying attention to the Q&A. And now let us get to the panelists. I can't say from my left to my right, so I'm just going to go down the stack boxes here, which may not be like your stack boxes. So why don't you introduce yourself? I will start with the top box on my screen. Hildy, why don't you say a few words about yourself to begin?
Hi, sure. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Hildy Silverman. I'm a short fiction author. My latest story is out now in, appropriately enough, the dystopian states of America. All the proceeds from this anthology go to the ACLU, so I'm very proud of that. I am also the former publisher of Space and Time magazine, which I published for 12 years. And very happy to be here this morning.
And Javon, how about saying a few words?
Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Javon Goard. I am a fifth year, or going into my fifth year, as a doctoral student in informatics at Indiana University at Bloomington, where I study aspects of video game culture. And I'm also a poet as well. Most of my poetry can be found on medium.com/@JavonGoard.
Thank you. And Doc?
Morning. I am Doc Coleman. I am the author of The Perils of Prague and The Shining Cog, and latest anthology that I'm in is not showing up on it.
If you hold it in front of your chest, it will show up.
There we go.
There we go. Paradise Found, Tales from the Library. It's about stories set in the afterlife in the Library of Alexandria. I write adventure steampunk comedy, and I'm glad to be here because life has rolled over me a lot, and I'm still here.
And how about you, Michael?
Hi, I'm Michael A. Ventrella. I got a bunch of different novels out. Bloodsuckers is about a vampire who runs for president. The most recent one is called Big Stick. You can sort of see the cover behind me by Phil Foglio. It's Teddy Roosevelt, Mark Twain, Harriet Tubman, a whole bunch of people having great steampunk adventure. Lots of don't take it too seriously, have some fun type of adventure. I'm also an editor. I have 9 anthologies out, the most recent one being Across the Universe, which is alternate Beatles stories, Beatles in different varieties, with stories from Spider Robinson and David Gerald and Jody Nye and Gregory Bedford, and that's it.
And I am Scott Edelman, your moderator, though these are moderate people who I'm sure will not need much moderation. My 99th short story just came out recently in Dreamforge magazine. I'll be reading the story at 1 o'clock today at Balticon, in a room you'll be able to find if you can figure out how to sign up for Zoom. And I'm the host of the Eating the Fantastic podcast, and life has rolled over for me with that because I take writers out to lunch or dinner or breakfast in a restaurant, hook on microphones and chat with them, and you eavesdrop. And there are no such things as going to restaurants at the moment. So as a beginning, why don't we just talk a little bit about that elephant in the room, and is what's going on in COVID-19 and this pandemic affecting your being able to get anything done as a writer? And if so, or if not, I mean, how are you dealing with that? I'll look at the screen. Hildy, why don't you jump in on that?
Wow, yes, it's definitely having an effect. I find it, as a writer, sometimes very hard to concentrate and actually write the fiction. I'm also in a frankly fortunate position that my day job I'm able to do from home. So I'm working full hours. I'm just doing it from home. And it's really challenging to make the shift from being in front of the laptop all day long doing my day job work to, okay, now I'm going to flip and write fiction. I cannot, most days, I mean, I managed to write some, but most days I cannot get myself to do it. And I don't know why. Even on the weekend, it's a challenge when I can't point to the job and say, oh, well, I just, was on the computer all day long. I'm just really having trouble with focus.
And how about you, Javon?
Yes. As a student myself, it's been hard to focus on anything for far too long, because it's also affected my sleep pattern as well. And as a poet, most of my poetry reflects on the human condition or human experience. And right now, the human condition seems pretty bleak. So, and so it's been difficult to try not write poetry inspired by the pandemic per se, because it comes off as just too sad or too pessimistic sometimes, especially when looking at the way certain people are handling the pandemic for sure. So it's been challenging for me as well as a poet and like a person who is very reflective of my own experiences when I'm like going through life.
How about you, Doc? How is this recent unpleasantness affecting you?
Well, I'm in a very similar boat to Hildy in that my work has converted completely to telework. So I'm working from home. So in a sense, seeing as I used to have an hour commute in and an hour commute home, I got that time back. But the time where I'm actually at work is now so much more intense. I'm more productive, but it's completely draining all my energy. So at the end of the day, when I finally get to put work aside, I feel like I've got nothing left. And it's really easy to turn on the TV and binge a Netflix series or pull up a video game, or even just go and look at all the insanity that's going on Facebook, instead of sitting down and pulling up fiction and trying to get in your head into your own world and writing some more words. Mm-hmm. And it's made it very difficult to balance the energy to let you shift that focus from one thing to the other.
Okay, how about you, Michael? What's happened with your writing?
Well, first I want to say that I am happy to hear that everyone else is in the same situation I am, and I'm not alone. And I assume many of the attendees here probably feel the same way. It is a very difficult time to get enthused to do anything. I am a criminal defense attorney. And so for a couple of months, there was nothing to do because the courts were continuing everything unless you were in jail, and nobody was out getting arrested. So I felt like, great, now I got all this spare time, but I just could not get my energy up to do it. And I agree, I end up playing computer games instead of writing. Although, I mean, I've done a little bit of work where I'm talking to another author. We're arranging a new shared world we're going to be working on. Talk to my publisher about doing a new anthology, probably not till the fall. But other than that, no, I haven't gotten a lot done, and I'm kind of embarrassed by that, but I'm glad to hear that I'm not alone.
Yeah, I am in the same boat, finding that it's difficult to believe that writing matters. That's one of the things that occurs in situations like this. And of course, this panel is not going to be solely focused on COVID-19. We're talking about in the panel, as it was written, many life things happen that bring us down, whether it's, death and divorce and, losing jobs and, how do we stay focused on doing the creative work. So it's going to cover all that. But, but I do find in a situation like that, which is affecting the entire world, you sit around to try and force yourself to believe that, okay, there's a purpose to what I am doing here. So what do we do as a trick? So are there any techniques that you come up with when you find yourself in a funk, when life is bringing you down and you know that you want to get writing done, even though it seems so hard. What kind of peekaboo, fool yourself into getting writing done things do you do? Have you discovered any of those? And whichever of you has something come to mind, just be the first one to dive right in there. I'm not going to go in any particular order there if someone has something.
I can start.
Go ahead, Javon.
In order for me to focus on anything longer than 30 minutes without scrolling through Facebook to see the state of the world, I actually go on Discord a lot with my friends. And so we get into a Discord channel at any random moment, or we just text one each other and we just say, hey, can you be in the Discord? Just to have another person there, even virtually. And that has really, really helped me sustain focus, because I know that when I'm like just muttering to myself, there's someone responding to me saying, what are you saying? I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. So it's helpful. It feels like I am in tandem with someone else and just not on my own. It's one of those things where it's like I enjoy my personal space, but this was definitely not the amount of time I thought I would have to myself ever in life. So Discord has definitely been the way to go. And that has definitely helped me think about poetry, even finish my own work, because my other friends, they're also doing telework as well. And so it's nice to basically work with someone else depending on, the day and the time. But that's been the biggest help for me.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? Hildy, have any tricks you play on yourself?
Yeah. So I'm a person who responds well to deadlines. So fortunately, the one I actually do have a real deadline coming up for an anthology story. So what I'm doing is giving myself interim deadlines, like, okay, you must have the first draft done by X date, you must have the edits done by Y date, and I write them down and I stick them in front of me. So that when I'm sitting and working, there they are glaring at me saying, you have something to do, lady. This is not just fun. This is not a distraction. You actually have something to do. So that seems to be helping to some degree. I also offer myself little mental rewards. Like, okay, if you write X number of words today, we can go take a walk outside, or, the Starbucks just opened not far from me. So like, okay, if you write that many words, you can go get yourself a nice chai latte. So just treating myself like I'm a 5-year-old, punishment and rewards. I'll be in timeout soon.
How about you, Michael?
Yeah, back in the old days, before all this COVID stuff happened, that's how I do myself as well. Quite often I'd have deadlines, especially with anthologies. Obviously I have to take care of those and get those deadlines. The problem is writing your own stuff when you're working on your next story or your next book, trying to force yourself to finish it when there's no actual deadline. And I would reward myself in various ways by saying I can't buy a new computer game until I finish this. Jonathan Mayberry said when he was first starting off, he would put a little a jar on the desk. He says, every time I write 1,000 words, I'm going to put $1 in. And by the time he was finished with the book and 90,000 words, he had $90 he could spend on himself. So finding tricks to motivate yourself is true of any task you're going to do, and what's going to work for you is not necessarily what's going to work for me, and vice versa. But rewards, yeah, I agree with giving yourself a reward for finishing something.
Yeah. How about you, Doc?
Yeah, I don't work so well with dealing with my own deadlines. If I have an external deadline, I will work and I will meet that. But for my own self-set deadlines, there's always the knowledge that I set it so I can change it. And that kind of doesn't work for me. So the big trick that I've taken to is trying to chip away at the problem, instead of trying to, and I've used this in NaNoWriMo before, but instead of trying to set aside
oh dear.
Instead of trying to set aside big blocks of time to sit down and write, I look at opportunities to take advantage of small pieces of time. So like I set myself a daily writing goal of 100 words a day. And it's like 100 words a day is bleeding nothing. But in order to get it, I have to sit down and start writing. And if I get 100 words, I'm likely to get 200 words or 500 words, or if I'm having a good day, over 1,000. And the fact that you do that every day really helps move things along. And what I've started doing lately is I've started trying to do little rituals to get me out of the work mindset and into a different mindset. So I'm learning Spanish with Duolingo. So at the end of my workday, I sit down, I pull out my phone, and I do a lesson or three on Duolingo to have something completely unrelated from my work to break up my mind. It gets me on a different device for a while, and gets me in a different subject matter, and then I try to go from that into writing my 100 words. And I mean, I try to do it every day. I've been successful in the past couple weeks doing it at least 4 days a week. Obviously, some things have interfered, like Balticon weekend, but it seems to be doing well. It's gaining momentum. And the other thing that I'm doing is for a change of pace. You have to not only focus on work, you have to refill the fun banks, because the fun helps you drive into doing the work. So I've started a tradition of Friday night gaming night. So on Friday evenings after work, I fire up a video game where I go and I slaughter things. And it's a great stress reliever.
I've been doing too much of that lately, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's why I limit it to Friday nights.
Yeah, I have found that what's happening with me is getting started on the writing is the thing. As we talked about, people refresh Facebook, refreshing Twitter, seeing what's going on. I actually was able to statistically prove that COVID-19 has had an effect on getting writing done and how I waste time, because Twitter analytics will tell you how many tweets you've sent each month. Can't figure out how to find out from Facebook how much I've done. But I went on Twitter and was able to go February, March, April, May, and see that I went from 250 tweets to 400 tweets. I think last month was 511 tweets, and I'm probably going to even be more because I'm having more interaction that way, and it takes more time to back away. But one of the things I end up doing is, it's not quite locking myself in a room and saying to my wife, slip food under the door and I'll slip a page out. So that's not what's going on, though people have done that historically. But I do most of my writing with a pen and a notepad. I will sit on the couch and say, you may not get off this couch until you have written X, until you have edited 2 full pages at least, until you have written so many words, until you have, if you are blocked on coming up with a story, I'll say, you must write down 10 story concepts, no matter how stupid they are. Give myself permission to be stupid. And, just think, okay, there's got to be something about a robot. There's got to be something about a rocket ship. And I don't get up until I've come up with 10, no matter how attractive anything else might be.
As long as your bladder cooperates with that.
Yeah, so yeah, that's true. That's true. One thing I want to get people to address is the idea of, separate from getting any writing done, is the writing itself and what you decide to write and the tenor of the stories you decide to write affected by what's going on. I personally find it hard to write chipper, uplifting stories with happy endings for the human race when I see the world falling apart. I mean, several of the last story I know I worked on, Deep Space, far future story, I could not imagine a future in which the United States still existed. So everyone on this, the names of all the people I had, Indians and Japanese and Chinese and Brazilians and Africans, and I did not use what would be stereotypically seen as an American name, because I could not picture that we based on the stupidity at the moment. This is me personally, that I could not get myself in the mood that we survived. So I'm finding that it is affecting my writing that way. So I'm wondering, how has dealing with issues affected the content? Not separate from getting anything done at all, but the content itself.
Can I just jump in and say that
Sure, go ahead.
that is something that always kind of bothered me about science fiction far in the future anyway, because Americans make up, 5% of the world's population, and yet when you see these TV shows, 95% are Americans. So I think doing that way makes sense anyway if you're writing a future story. So I just wanted to interject that.
Well, not around COVID so much. So a couple of years ago, I went through a very difficult period in my life. I was having a divorce, going through a divorce after a very long marriage. The fallout from that divorce involved, I had to sell my home. And at the same time at work, there had been a change in regime and they were driving people out of the company in a really horrible way. So it was all happening at once. It was awful and very hard to focus. And yes, that's when I actually wrote the story for this book, for the dystopian states of America. The timing was just right in that it was supposed to be sort of a bleak story. And the content, frankly, the story is loosely based on some events that were happening in my life at the time, but of course set in this apocalyptic world. The apocalypse is currently happening in my story. And yeah, it's pretty bleak. I mean, most of the stories in here are horror anyway, and I do enjoy writing horror, but this is a little different horror than I would usually write. And yeah, it's certainly, I would think, probably one of the darkest things I've written. And it was absolutely influenced by just being horribly depressed and going through all this crap at the same time.
Now, I see there's a question from the audience that I'd like people to tie into. We're being asked, are you more or less able to write certain types of writing, dark fiction versus fluffy fiction? So you can address that part as well, whether when you do get the writing done, are you finding that people are writing more towards the horror side than the science fiction side as you address that? Not just the tenor, but which genre you're ending up falling in, whether that's a part as well. So that you go into that.
Well, yeah, and this story was horror. Actually, the one I'm working on right now is not horror. It's kind of a mashup science fiction fantasy. It's not humorous, though. I do write a lot of humorous fiction, but it's been a little hard to get into that mindset. Unfortunately, I didn't have any stories due that required that tone.
Mm-hmm.
Could I do it? Yeah, I suppose so, but I imagine the humor's got to be a bit on the dark side.
Mm. So, Javon, how has your poetry been affected in terms of? Oh, I see Doc's lips are moving, but he's muted.
Yeah, I was muted. I was going to say I'm a bit of a contrast to that in that I have a very compartmental mind. So I will literally watch TV while writing, and I don't have any problems with storyline crossover. So events in my life don't tend to find their way directly into my writing, but I do tend to write more lighthearted adventure. So it's actually
even now,
and it's actually helpful for me to sit down and write, because that takes me out of this world with all of its problems and puts me into my world where horrible things are happening to these characters, and they're still managing to make jokes about it. And some of them are deliberate jokes, and some of them are just dry commentary that is hilarious, but they don't realize it at the time. So for me, it's kind of therapeutic to sit down and write, because it's refreshing for me as well as being a way to step away from all the problems of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for my poems in particularly, I too have like gone through a bit of a rough patch myself. I'm from Maryland, and again, I go to school in Indiana, and I had to leave Indiana early this semester for personal reasons. So I was kind of already home before the country decided to close its doors. Um, and in that time, I didn't write anything because I was going through stuff and then the world was going through stuff. So it was kind of hard. And then eventually I just said, screw it, I want to write. So I just took the energy that I already felt and then just started writing about it. So I wrote two poems based off what was happening. One is called Stay Home, Stay Humble, and the other one is called Next in Line. And Stay Home and Stay Humble is really a poem about exactly what is happening, but also focusing more on human compassion and connection, which I think some people think gets disconnected if you don't see people physically, which is not true. And also just having humility can go a long way, like not just thinking about surviving on your own, but knowing that your body also means something to my body is something that we should all take into consideration and actually believe is a real thing. And next in line is really about going to the grocery store, because that is definitely something that is now a whole new experience. Again, seeing people with masks on, it's just like, yeah, that person's about to rob the store. I should leave immediately, turn around. But now everyone's like that, right? Everyone's like that. And so it's very interesting to see how things got flipped instantaneously within a week or two. And so I just used what I was already feeling to funnel my two poems and just published it. And since then, that has allowed me to kind of vent out most of the frustration that I've been feeling. And since we've been living in this state of America for some time now, my body's getting adjusted, and that means my mind is getting it like a little bit acclimated to it. So now my poems are starting to revert back to just thinking about life, thinking about how we move through life and time and space, stuff like that.
Mm. And Michael, how has it affected the tenor of what you're writing at the moment?
Well, I have the advantage of having two different sort of split personalities with my writing, because I have my novels tend to be humorous but yet political. And so that's sort of an escape where, you know, they're meant to be fun novels. They're not meant to be heavy and serious, and they're not meant to preach to you. At the same time, I also have a blog where I talk about politics, and that's where I can really, you know, spew out my views. And, you know, I just recently had a book called How to Argue the Constitution with a Conservative, where as a lawyer, I talked about what the Constitution really means. And I could rant in my book, and I can rant on my political blogs, which allow me to get that out of my system, I guess is what I'm trying to say about the whole frustration about how this is being handled. So then when I go into the writing of what I like, of what I usually write, it's an escape, because my books are an escape. They're meant to be fun. They're not meant to be serious, you know, deadly, make you upset at the end of them, you know. And so in a way, that's my escape. Writing sort of helps me relax, because I don't write the heavy, serious, terrible things.
Well, now that we're about a half an hour in with 20 minutes to go, I want to shift over to a question. There's one here that seems like a good one to shift gears a little bit, where someone's asking us that when we look back on the problems we have, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's anything else that's going on in the world, or are we able to somehow see that as a gift that we're able to transmute the pain of life into art? Is there any way that we can look at it and say, well, at least I got this, you know, this other thing out of it? I know that personally, every once in a while on Twitter or Facebook, someone has said, oh, I know we're going through terrible trouble, but think of all the great art that came out in Weimar, Germany or something like that. To which I say, well, I would be very happy and willing to give up this particular story that I wrote out of my pain to not have had the pain. I mean, I'm glad the story has occurred, but I would rather it not have happened. I know there's a particular story I wrote out of my despair over the most recent presidential election, and I was finding myself not able to get any writing done. I ended up writing a story that's ended up selling to Cat Rambo's anthology, If This Goes On. which was called The Stranded Time Traveler Embraces the Inevitable, about someone going back and trying to fix what went wrong with the last election and it not quite working. But I would gladly have, I love the story, it's one of my favorite recent ones, I would gladly have sacrificed having written that story for not having felt that pain, because I'm sure other stories would have surely happened. So, so how do the rest of you feel about that concept? Are you, when you write that story that was born out of pain and tragedy, are you able to be grateful for it, or would you, or are you able to just say, well, gee, I'd rather not have written that story and not have felt that pain? And if there are any specific stories you want to mention, or poems you want to mention, go ahead. I don't know who wants to take that one.
Well, what I said before, the story I wrote, the dystopian story, it's called Divided We Fell. I have been told by other people, and I agree myself, it's probably one of the best things I've written. So that's good. It's been very well received at readings and such, and apparently people like it, and that's great. But yeah, I would much rather have not gone through any of the stuff that inspired it. Absolutely. There's no trade-off. There's no question. It's life versus fiction. But that said, since I can't wave my magic wand and undo bad things, I am grateful to at least perhaps level up my writing based on the experience, because the experience happened. It can't be changed. It can't be undone. And wishing it so doesn't change anything. So I may as well get something out of it. So if it helps me level up in writing, then so be it. That's some consolation, I guess.
I think everything we experience comes into our writing sooner or later. I mean, it might not be blatant and obvious, but I certainly have put myself into my characters' heads and given them situations that I've had to face in the past, because that way I know how they felt, if you know what I'm saying. So in that sense, I don't see how this is not going to affect us in some ways, maybe not plot-wise, but at least in my characters' minds, what it would be like to be in this kind of situation. But anything you experience in life is like that.
Anyone else have a comment on that one?
I know for me that the therapeutic writing to process things tends to happen more when I'm doing blog posts or writing stuff on social media. The things that end up in my fiction writing really have to go down into my subconscious and get processed before coming back up. And at that time, they're mixing with so many different other ideas that right now it's really hard for me to point at something and say that was inspired by this point in my life.
And separate from the difficulty getting writing done, there's also difficulty getting reading done. We have a question here, whether we're even able to get reading done, and what is it that we're willing or able to read. I found that I was not able to get a lot of reading done. There were some things I would read and I just read the paragraph over and over again. And you know what I went back to as my comfort reading? George Eliot's Middlemarch. That for some reason I found Middlemarch to be the comfort food, this massive novel where life was a lot different. And so what have you folks found yourself been able to read, willing to read? What is your go-to comfort stuff if you have had trouble reading?
So I have been diving myself way more into poetry than ever before in my life, which I'm slowly discovering that may be like that new sense of direction for me in my life. I've been reading this anthology work on Langston Hughes, who is basically like my muse. Essentially, I've been reading Tracy K. Smith, Life on Mars, and those bodies of work are just so beautiful. They're so raw for a good portion of them, and that right there is my sense of a good time, because it allows me to basically use what I call my natural language, which is the poetic devices out there, and using that to convey a story, to tell a narrative. And so when I'm like feeling down or out of luck, or even if I'm just like overall happy, I would rather sit down and just read some poems before I transition into any other reading, because certain other kinds of readings may not give me the same feeling or effects to my body that I need at the moment, but someone's like 50-word poem, right, or very short, haiku can just really change my entire mindset, my entire day.
Anyone else? What are you reading?
I'm not reading as much as I should. I'm playing too many computer games. For me, that seems like more of an escape. Except John Scalzi's third book in the Emperor series came out, and I got it as soon as it came out and read it through because I've been waiting a year for it. So I suppose if something like that suddenly pops up, I'm going to find my way to read things that I've been anxiously awaiting. But I've got all these other books on my shelves that I'm going to go, I've been meaning to read this for a long time. It's got to be something that's going to make me go, wow, I can't wait. I've been waiting forever for this. Like Robert Sawyer's new novel comes out next month, and obviously I'm waiting for that one. So certain ones I'm definitely going to go out of my way to read, but otherwise, you're right. It's kind of hard to get yourself enthused to just sit down and read. Sometimes you just read a paragraph, and like Scott said, you realize you're reading it 2 or 3 times.
How about you, Hildy, Doc, or what are you reading to take your mind off things?
So, like probably everyone else, I have been having trouble with insomnia from time to time. I know, shocking, no one else suffers this. But so what I've taken to doing is I read before bed. I don't watch TV. And I picked this series, and I love it. I'm going to give it a little plug. It's by Kevin Hearn. It's called the Iron Druid series. It's sort of fantasy set in the real world, obviously not our current real world, but the real world, but with fantasy characters and beings and such. And it's fun, it's adventure, it's action, it's lighthearted, and it's just, for me, then there's seven or 8 books in it. It's just been perfect for nighttime. You read, the big fight scene, and there's a lot of humor in it too. It's very, it's fun. It lightens up my brain, so I'm not thinking about the last aggravating thing I saw on Facebook. I'm thinking of this, fun scene with druids fighting, and I find that's been helpful. So I think I'm actually, because I read like an hour and a half a night, I'm probably reading more than I was beforehand.
Yeah. Right now, I have realized I happen to be in the middle of reading K.M. Sparr's novel Docile, his debut novel. I don't know if anyone has read that. And what's bizarre about it is, what's shocking is not the amount of sex in the book, but just that anybody is near anybody else at all in the first place. So we're going to be reading any book in which there's a mass gathering, or which people can even hug, as almost being a form of porn. The fact that they can even get near each other without masks.
They're at a concert.
I know. Wait. They had a conversation and they didn't wash their hands afterwards. How is that even possible? So it's it's a whole different thing. Someone's asking whether, as we're getting to the final 10 minutes, I think here, someone's asking, do your characters ever talk to you to help you get through rough experiences? I know my characters don't, because to me, I'm in control. They're not in control. I'm one of those kinds of writers. They do what I ask them to do, so I don't have those conversations. But do any of you find them providing comfort to you as you deal with them, that you're as if you're hanging out with a friend you couldn't meet in real life?
No.
Yeah, my characters don't so much talk to me as they talk to each other. And I think there have been a couple occasions where I've imagined what my characters would do in a similar situation, but yeah, that's not something that I find gets into my life a lot.
I will have my characters having discussions, and I will be surprised by what they say. That happens, I think, to every writer. The conversation starts going, and the next thing you realize that you're letting secrets out without realizing you're doing it, or letting your personal emotions come out. But I think that's common to any writer, I would think. Yeah,
same. My characters talk to each other, or I'm writing a conversation, and exactly what you were saying. And sometimes it's a little bit of a surprise, like, oh, really? That's what he thinks? Or she really said that? So, I guess it's working out what's bubbling in the subconscious.
Yeah. Well, I have a couple of questions here we can sort of blend together. Someone's asking us whether we feel that in the coming years there will be an excess of pandemic writing, that there'll be a lot of stories, based on this, and we're also asked, how is this changing what you were going to write in the first place about the societal changes in society, meaning the future that you imagined in the story you were writing in December, January is no longer the future that you can write about. When you consider those things, how's that changing what you're writing?
I am surprised that I can't think of any stories about the 1918 pandemic. I'm not sure if everyone just didn't write about them or if the stories just didn't last, 100 years for us to remember them. And I'm wondering if just people don't want to read that. It's just too depressing. And once they get out of it, they're going to say, no, I don't want to do that. I can imagine someone writing some romance novels where people meet on Zoom, and it's like, and they meet that way, and that would be the meet cute of those kind of stories. I can see that coming, but I'm not sure if anyone really wants to read a really depressing story about the pandemic. But then again, people read really depressing stories about war all the time, so.
Yeah, well, Sarah Pinsker's novel, A Song for a New Day, which is up for Nebula, and we'll find out next week what happens, came out in November before the pandemic, and people who don't understand the snail-like pace of publishing, if it had come out, let's say now or this November rather than last November, people have assumed that it had been inspired by the pandemic, as opposed to, no, it takes years for these things to happen. But that has proven to be a very popular novel in the public consciousness because of its predictive nature. I wonder if people will be up for experiencing too many of them.
Jonathan Mayberry has a comic book out, like a 6-series comic, graphic novel called Pandemica or something like that.
Yeah, Pandemica, that's right.
The last issue, which was the climax, got postponed because of the pandemic. So, and it's been out for like a couple of years now. So it's there's irony for you.
We're being asked a question that sort of has been touched on a little bit, which is basically, we are all trapped at home. Some of us have spouses, some of us have children, some of us have the job we're trying to get done, and have some kind of separation between our workspace, fiction space, and our work that we get paid money to survive space, because writing normally is not it for most of us. How do you deal with that? What tricks do you play? What techniques do you have? Do you get up and have different rooms for different things? I mean, how do you make sure you can get things done with what's happening in what your new workspace is?
I've transitioned from my living room to my dining room to just my room because I hurt my back not too long ago. So I've just been stuck in there for like 5 days. So my workspaces have definitely shifted immensely. I think what really allows me to focus is light. I love sunlight in particularly because I'm so used to the fluorescent lighting in academic buildings to be surrounded by just natural light for so long and so consistently has definitely been the thing for me. So every time I go into the dining room, my living room, or my room, the first thing I do is just open up all the blinds, like the whole house is completely full of sunlight, because right there, that sunlight, it gives me that feeling that life is still continuing in some shape or form outside. Again, most of my poems are about the human experience, and part of that is just how nature works around us and how we still know very little about nature. As I wrote in a poem that hopefully will be published soon, I said, to revel in unnaturalness is its own power, because we assume that as humans, we know everything, which is completely not true. Obviously, we're all stuck in here, right? So these things take time to understand what nature has intended for us. So I've just been able to shift that energy from room to room, because as long as my internal mind, my body, my soul is still like there, I think the room in and of itself helps a little bit with the readjustment. But if it's not that sunlight that is there, then it's probably a slow day for me.
How about the rest of you?
I know that when I started writing, I made a deliberate attempt to kind of condition myself so I could write anywhere. So this hasn't really affected me as much, except that now the cats and my wife have more access to me to interrupt me. But other than that, I'm pretty much, it's just getting myself started more than anything else.
My wife is an artist. Some of you may know her, Heidi Hooper. She's the one who makes art out of dryer lint. You may have seen her at various conventions or on To Tell the Truth. And she has her art, and she has her studio downstairs, and my room is basically a little cubby in the back of the bedroom. So we're on different floors, we're separate, and you know, when I'm working, she's downstairs working as well. So we've had that separation for many, many years. So obviously nothing has changed with the pandemic for us.
Yes, and for me, most of my writing is not done on the keyboard. Most of my writing is done longhand with a notebook, and so I'm off somewhere else tapping that pen against my chin and looking up in the sky, and you know, so that's my separation. I will point out there's something you said, Michael, about looking for stuff from the 1918 about the pandemic, and we had a comment in the chat room that someone pointed out that back then media about the pandemic was suppressed because of war censorship, and thus the pandemic as a thing didn't take hold in the public consciousness. Thank you, audience member, for that bit of information. So that may be why we didn't have as much. We've got now 5 minutes to go, maybe 4 minutes to go now. So does anyone have any final, as we wrap this up, thoughts on how to deal with again, not just this, I know we ended up being COVID-19 heavy, but about dealing with life when it wants to steamroll over you. Any final thoughts on this?
I would just like to say that I'm only 25 years old. So that's just to point out that I'm still learning so much about life, and it just seems like every month there's something going on that should have been addressed well before me. And so,
Hey, stop blaming us. We tried, you know.
I'm not blaming
We
any.
didn't
I'm not
start the
blaming.
fire.
I'm not blaming any age demographic whatsoever. I'm just saying that through my years thus far on this earth, it's just been very interesting and intriguing, of a roller coaster thus far. And one of the things I hope all of us will hopefully come to realize is that there are people all around us, and we should also acknowledge the people in our lives. We are all going through something. Some are going it at more desperate times than others. And so if you haven't say, you know, I love you to your spouse, or say I love you to whomever is in your family, even if it's just your friend, you should really do that, because you never know. You never know. So I'm definitely been very, very thankful to be able to, you know, be here with my mother, be here with my brother, be able to say hello to my cousins every so often, even just play games with my aunt and my uncle. Those moments right there are something I wish I would have already been in the active process of doing, but during this whole state of crises right now is definitely something I'm not taking.
I'm not sure if humanity has ever not had a time of crisis. And when I was growing up, we had a bunch of assassinations, you know, successful ones in the 60s, you know, and then there were riots, and there was, you know, Philadelphia being bombed, you know, and people being lynched, you know. It's happened throughout our history. This is just our current crisis. There'll be another one after this is over, I'm sure. You know, it's kind of sad to think of it, but we had some pretty peaceful years for a while, and then that made us think everything was getting better. I'm not sure that's the case.
Yeah, but that's wonderful advice, Javon, that we all must try to be good to one another and support one another. And that's one of the things I love most about this community, and that I miss the most, not being able to be physically with you. I've been going to conventions for almost 50 years now. My first one when I was 15, and this is the place where I am buoyed up and given strength and sent back out into the real world to be able to survive. So I'm glad that that you brought that one up. That's a thing that we
There's
need to
a very
do.
good point there, that this crisis is impacting our social connections with each other, and not being physically connected. It's that much harder to maintain those social connections, and that is, I see it being so very tough for a lot of my friends who are used to being able to get together and hug people and go visit people. And we've been finding creative ways to try to provide support for each other.
Yeah, and I wish we could all go do that now. I see we've got our 1 minute warning, so the hugging will not be able to happen. Happen here will happen next year. Next year, I want to see everyone in Balticon in real life. When this panel ends, as it will do in a moment, the screen will vanish and it will have an address saying join us on Discord. We're going to attempt, some of us, to wander over there. And if there are any things you wanted to say about this topic that you were unable to say, within the panel, that is where we shall try to be. I'm glad everyone's here. Thank you, Hildy, Javon, Doc, and Michael, for joining us. And you can't come up now and ask us to autograph books or to ask us any other questions. So you know where to find us. We're all Googleable and on Twitter and on Facebook, and you can reach out and we can continue this conversation in this community online. And thank you, Balticon, for allowing us to have this way of getting together with each other in a world that's trying to keep us apart.
Great. Thanks, Scott, for moderating.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Be safe.
I don't know if we're about to disappear.
Yep, there we go.
Yes,
Bye.
we are.
Thank you so much.
Cool.
Thank all.